There are 22 episodes in the first season of Star Wars The Clone Wars, and today we're going to be ranking them all based solely on their opening quote or moral. Let's discover which quotes have stood the test of time. Here we have each moral from the opening of every episode in Season 1 of Star Wars The Clone Wars, and it's important before we rank them that we determine which significance each rank has. I'm going to say S tier is a quote that I live by every single day. It's something that I'm going to make my phone's wallpaper. I'm going to print it out and put it on the wall. It is like a God tier quote that is so amazing. I'm going to think about it even after I've watched the episode. A tier is a high level quote that really makes you think and hits you right in the feels right before the episode, but doesn't do too much else and doesn't, make you think about it after the episode. B tier is a quote that I like, but it's been said multiple different times and doesn't really have as much of an impact on me. C tier is a quote that doesn't make any sense or doesn't really have any meaning, and it doesn't strike me too much as motivational. F tier at the bottom is a garbage quote that is the equivalent of spitting in George Lucas's face and shouldn't have even been in the show. Whichever writer came up with a quote that goes in F tier probably doesn't work on that show anymore, and it's probably for the best. Alright, again, getting started with our very first episode, Ambush. Our first quote from Ambush is, "Great leaders inspire greatness in others." Now, this is the very first episode of the Clone Wars, the episode where Yoda is introduced. We see the clones and fighting, the separatist armies. I really think that it's a good, solid quote. Doesn't really give you much else to think about, though. It doesn't really have that, that substance that you need. So I think we're going to put that in B tier for now and determine from there. I think B tier is a good middle ground for it. Very solid quote to start the show off with. Doesn't really do too much else for us. Moving on to our second quote from the episode, Rising Malevolence. "Belief is not a matter of choice, but conviction." Really, I fuck with this one hard. I think this is a really good quote here. Talks about conviction, talks about strength. Moving from that, I think we're gonna have to put that one in A tier. I definitely think that that's an A tier quote based on just the power that it conveys. When you read that at the beginning of the episode, you know that stuff's about to go down when you're watching this. From the episode Shadow of the Malevolence, we're still in the same arc here, so this one is kind of going to be in the same realm as the first quote that we saw. Easy is the path to wisdom for those not blinded by ego. That one is something that I would 100% put on my wall. I would print this out and write it on my wall. I would get that shit tattooed on my body. I probably would make it my phone wallpaper. It's going to be my phone wallpaper right now. It's just a quote that goes so hard. That is 100% S tier, and that is one of the best episodes from the first season of the Clone Wars too. Thinking about Plo Koon, saving his clones, saving the wolf pack there, definitely is one of the better ones. Next up, Destroy Malevolence. The quote we have for this one is, "A plan is only as good as those who see it through." I mean, you're just kind of stating facts at this point. This is just general knowledge, to be honest, thinking about it like that. This is honestly going to have to go in C tier right now because I think it's pretty obvious that you have to follow a plan through, and it's not going to be good if you don't follow it through. So that was kind of a bit of a stupid one. Bordering F tier there, but we'll put it in C for now because I don't think a writer deserved to lose their job for that. For now, we'll see. The quote for episode 5, again, one of the top tier episodes in season 1. Not too much good going for the first season, but this is definitely one of the ones up there. Rookies, where we meet, our favorite characters, Fives, Heavy, Echo. But we have the best confidence builder is experience. That is the quote. And I gotta say, it's a bit of a letdown from, the rest of the episode. Maybe the writers took all their work and put it in writing the script for that episode, because pretty disappointing, to be honest, what we have for the quote at the beginning of this episode. It's gonna have to go at the bottom of B tier because it doesn't really have much else to it. It just kind of makes me think of, a generic quote that you're gonna see on Facebook. Moving on to episode 6, Downfall of a Droid. This is, a pretty disappointing episode. I gotta say, the quote actually feels a lot better than the episode while watching it. The quote is, "Trust in your friends and they'll have reason to trust in you." And I gotta say, again, it seems like a bit common knowledge to think about that, but I gotta say, it's a pretty good quote. I'm gonna put it in A tier because that's something that really gets you in your feels and makes you thinking about that, especially foreshadowing to later on in the episode, the betrayal that's gonna happen. So really think that it's a high level quote for a really low tier episode itself. Now we come back here to episode 7, Duel of the Droids. Another really great, horrible episode, but with I think a really good quote that just makes it stand out so much more. The quote for this one is, "You hold on to friends by keeping your heart a little softer than your head." The best part about this one is that it is about the fight between R8 and R2-D2, and obviously these droids do not have hard heads or hearts, but I think it kind of speaks about that friendship again and that trust in your friends. So still not as good as the first quote. I do think that it's a bit too mystic and a bit too strange for, being a high tier, but we're going to put it mid B tier for right now, and then we'll see after what we think and how we feel about that. After this, a completely different shift, again, to another just horrible dog shit episode in Season 1 of the Clone Wars, the Bombad Jedi episode. Again, the quote for this one is, "Heroes are made by the times." I gotta say, it's a pretty decent quote. There's nothing too bad about it, but it does feel a bit disappointing in the fact that they could have done something more interesting, and it very much seemed like, from what I remember from the documentaries, George Lucas was very adamant on having Jar Jar Binks in these episodes and in these episodes of the Clone Wars. Dave Filoni, and I don't think most of the team was too happy about it because they knew the reception around Jar Jar Binks and what the episodes would get, and so I gotta say, this episode did not feel like it had a lot of passion, and you can see that being reflected in the actual quote right here. So I gotta say, we're gonna put "Heroes are made by the times," the quote for episode 8, just in C tier. It's probably at the bottom. Jar Jar Binks was not a hero. No times made him a hero, and he was one of the worst characters throughout most of the Clone Wars, so pretty disappointing in that one. An amazing episode follow-up to this, though, not having Jar Jar Binks in it anymore, obviously, getting our first look at Luminara and Duel in episode 9, Cloak of Darkness, and I really think that this episode just took another step because, the animators, the writers didn't have Jar Jar, didn't have to work him in and force him down your throat in every aspect of the story. Unfortunately, the quote doesn't really give us too much. The quote is, "Ignore your instincts at your peril." Doesn't really give us too much to it. I think it's an okay quote, but it doesn't really do anything for the story. It doesn't make you think. It doesn't motivate you at all. So that's another quote that I think we're going to put in bottom of the B tier, I think it's still a bit better than the confidence building experience, but I do think that it's kind of obvious that if you don't listen to your instincts, you're probably going to die. So especially in the Star Wars universe. Following it up with another banger episode, we have episode 10, The Lair of Grievous. Now this one is another top tier episode. I've got to say, there are some golden eggs within the first season of the Clone Wars, but unfortunately most of it is pretty dog water. If we look at the quote for this episode, it's "Most powerful is he who controls his own power." And that's not too bad. I got to say, it's a pretty decent quote. It speaks about control, obviously, with Plo Koon's old apprentice Nadar and Nadar's need for power, and showing this new generation of Jedi that really are just falling more to the dark side and trying to use power to win the war. So really does show the constraint and control that Jedis can have, and I think it's a pretty good quote that's going to, set the tone for the episode and kind of incite some of that thought at the beginning as well. So for something like this, we're going to put it definitely in A tier. Like, I do think that quote stuck with me throughout most of the episode, so it's a pretty good one. Moving on now to episode 11, Dooku Captured. Another really great quality episode here, I gotta say. Not too much in terms of the story, but just the banter between all the characters, Dooku, Anakin, and Obi-Wan, really, I think, brought the story together. The quote for this one is, "The winding path to peace is always a worthy one, regardless of how many turns it takes." And I gotta say, that is like one of the best quotes, I think, if not the best quote in the entire series. So we're gonna put it, at the very top S tier. That is a quote that I would get, again, on my body tattooed, put it on a mug, sell it on Etsy. That is 100% something that I think people would want to buy. And I think even people who don't like Star Wars would agree that, they would reminisce and agree with that quote. Unfortunately, bringing it back to another Jar Jar episode, they're really trying to do us dirty with this one here. We do have the Gungan General episode 12. The quote for this one isn't too bad. It's "Fail with honor rather than succeed by fraud." I do think that it speaks about the kind of importance that Jar Jar has in a role here and trying to take charge as a leader, but it's just such an obnoxious episode, and I gotta say the quote really doesn't do much for me. Fail with honor rather than succeed by fraud. The pirates succeed by fraud, and they have a great time doing it. They really, I think, do much better with that. So this quote doesn't really strike me as awesome. Again, it being a Jar Jar episode, we're going to have to put it in C tier, unfortunately. We're not judging by the episode, we're judging by the quote, but it's still a pretty unfortunate quote that doesn't do much for you at the beginning of the episode while thinking about it. After this, we have episode 13, Jedi Crash. The quote for this one is, "Greed and fear of loss are the roots that lead to the tree of evil." And this is another absolute banger of a quote. Amazing episode, amazing writing. What a great story and some awesome character development. And the quote on top of that is just another, it's something that I would see in like a hippie's house while I go over there to get stoned and watch Star Wars. It really is, I gotta say, another S tier quote. This is something that I would put on a tapestry and have it on my wall so that I can read it every night before I go to bed. It is just such a good quote, and I'm sure is one of the morals that the Jedi teach at the Jedi Temple, and that's how inspirational it feels. Moving on to episode 14, we have the episode Defenders of Peace. Now the quote for this one is, "When surrounded by war, one must eventually choose a side." I really do like the point of this quote here. Obviously it's talking about the village that the Jedi are stranded at, and how the villagers have to either side with the Separatists or side with the Jedi and fight for their peace and their freedom, or else they're going to get blown up by the big ass bomb. I do think that this quote is a little lackluster and a little explaining the obvious, like some of the other ones we've had. Obviously, you're going to have to choose a side if you are being surrounded by war. It is difficult to remain neutral in a situation like that, so it does feel like it's just kind of explaining the episode to us and treating us like younger viewers that I'm sure we were while watching it. So a mid-tier quote, I'm going to have to put it in the middle of B tier for this right now. After this, we've got the episode 15, Trespass. This is another great episode. This is the ice world, Ordo Plutonia, which is the moon that's orbiting the world of Pantora. Some great characters in here and some awesome action scenes as well. The quote really is pretty simple. It's "Arrogance diminishes wisdom." I've got to say, as simple as it is, I do kind of like it. Obviously referring to the chairman of Pantora, how his arrogance and his pride essentially for his planet blinds him to the fact that this is a group of people who live on this planet and aren't just animals that are savages, as he calls them. So I've got to say it's a pretty decent quote. I'm going to have to put it in the bottom of A tier. It's a high B, but the simplicity of it sometimes does work. Some of them are just utterly stupid and don't make any sense, but this one actually does make a decent amount of sense, again, in context of the episode. And above all, I feel like it's a good thing to keep in mind, keep your arrogance in check while you're working on this stuff. After this, again, jumping around in the time point, season 1 is very much all over the place in the story. So we're now back to before the movie takes place on Christophsis, the episode The Hidden Enemy. The quote for this one is, "Truth enlightens the mind, but won't always bring happiness to your heart." And this is just absolutely another banger one here. Obviously, kind of ominous, not as straightforward as the other ones. It's not simply explaining it to us. It's giving us some sort of hint of what's to come and what's to follow with this episode. Obviously, the betrayal by Slick and all these issues that are going to happen here. I do think it's another mid-A tier episode. It's just absolutely, an A tier quote. Just absolutely beautiful in the way that it's worded and the way that it makes you feel. Won't bring happiness to your heart. And that's the happiness that Slick doesn't find at the end of the episode while trying to fight for his brothers. Realizes that he's been corrupted by greed and money. So just another beautiful quote to definitely, we've got some good ones at the top of the list here. If you're enjoying the video so far, please don't forget to like and subscribe, as it helps out the channel and really allows me to keep making these kinds of videos and awesome content for you guys. Episode 17 is the beginning of our finishing arc for the season, and I'd have to say it's a pretty solid arc. It doesn't really blow you away, but there are some good characters, some good moments in it, and I'd have to say some pretty decent quotes. Episode 17 is the start of the Blue Shadow Virus arc. The quote for this one is, "Fear is a disease, hope is its only cure." Pretty decent. My only gripe with this one is that fear is a disease does not make sense when this is a virus. Blue Shadow Virus is in the name. Talking about diseases and viruses really does confuse the viewer and makes it kind of difficult to understand. So honestly, just because of that and talking about a cure for the disease, it's very much insinuating to what we have here. I'm going to have to put it in the middle of B tier. Actually, we're going to put it at the end of B tier, bordering the top of C, just because the confusion it gives to the viewer at the beginning of the episode, really, they could have done better. Doesn't sound as good, obviously, saying fear is the virus, but they could have made a better connection if they're going to try to insinuate that. After this, we've got episode 18, Mystery of 1,000 Moons. Now, this is a pretty good episode as well. We see some awesome Star Wars lore and background characters that have been talked about in the past. We see the Angels of the Moon of Iego, which is pretty awesome to see. The quote for this one is, I'd say, pretty generic and kind of basic, kind of cringy. It's, "A single chance is a galaxy of hope." Now, obviously, A New Hope. We talk a lot about hope in the one before this. The one before this mentions hope. This one also mentions hope. It does feel a bit repetitive, and it does feel a bit lackluster. They're mentioning hope in the last one. Obviously, the whole episode is about hoping that they can find the cure in time to save their friends, but they really feel like they dropped the ball on this one, and they could have done something better to do this. This does just feel like lazy writing. I'm sure they were busy with it, and the intern that got stuck with making the quote honestly should have been let go for that, because he could have put so much more effort into this and actually made a good quality quote. So this is an F tier one for sure. Unfortunately, our first F tier, but it was going to have to come at some point, and I'm surprised that it came this late on in the season. After this, we've got another amazing arc. We've got the Ryloth arc, the very early on one happening with Mace Windu, Anakin at the beginning, obviously, and Obi-Wan. The storm over Ryloth is a great episode, I have to say, and the quote is pretty good too following that. The quote reads, "It is a rough road that leads to the heights of greatness." Now, obviously, this is, again, feels a little self-explanatory, saying that you have to work hard to be great, but at the same time, it does give kind of that mystical, inspirational vibe to it. And I've got to say, it does make me feel pretty good about myself that I'm climbing this road. You think to the beginning of some of the episodes where Mace Windu is trying to storm the capital cities, or Obi-Wan is trying to get on the ground, and it does feel like, you're there alongside the Jedi, trying to grit and fight to save the planet of Ryloth. So we're definitely going to put this one in a top of A tier for sure. I definitely think it could have been a bit better, but for now, it's a pretty good quality quote, I'd have to say. Following this, we've got the episode Innocence of Ryloth. Now, this is another great episode, and this is where Obi-Wan has to destroy the gun batteries that are keeping the transport ships away. This is a great episode where we get to see Waxer and Boyle come into play for the first time, and again, the innocence of them and the innocence of the people of Ryloth. This quote really does reach the top of the list for me as well. The quote is, "The cost of war can never be truly accounted for." And that is just such a real one. It's something that we don't see enough in Star Wars. And I've got to say, it is such a good quote, just talking about, we never see the civilians in these episodes, in these giant battles, in these worlds that we're fighting on. Christophsis, you think of Ryloth. Ryloth you do see more frequently, but you never really see the people whose homes you're fighting in, whose homes and, worlds you're fighting for. So it's such a beautiful episode to be able to see Wax and Boyle have an interaction with this local girl, Uma, and try to fight for her home and help her, achieve her freedom. So just a beautiful quote for that. We can never account for the cost of war, and I think it's definitely top the list. That is another S tier quote. I've got to say, coming to the end here, I'm actually quite surprised with the amount of S tier quotes we have. We're feeling pretty heavy on the B tier, which I anticipated for the first season. Obviously, they were still getting with their stride of the writing and, the types of quotes and episodes they wanted to do. The fact that they were able to come up with something for every single episode of every single season really says something, but being earlier on in the first season, we do have pretty high standards considering they haven't used any quotes before. So they're not running dry on their supply. It's not like it's season 7 or season 6 and they're trying to think of stuff that they've never thought of before. This is, the cream of the crop, should be the batch. So pretty decent so far. I'm quite happy with the S tier quotes, and only one F tier is something that I'm pretty proud of for us. Moving on to the final episode of the Ryloth arc, we have Liberty on Ryloth, another great quality episode. This is where we have Mace Windu trying to free the final city and the final holdout on Ryloth, getting the help of Cham Syndulla to be able to free the city. Our quote for this one, I'd have to say, is pretty mid-tier. "Compromise is a virtue to be cultivated, not a weakness to be despised." Not too bad, not too great. I think it gets the job done for me. Pretty great episode, I have to say. Obviously, the quote's talking about the compromise between Cham Syndulla and Orn Free Tar, the senator, but I have to say they could have done a bit more in terms of the maybe motivational part to it. Compromise being a virtue to be cultivated. Obviously talking about how compromise is important, but I feel like they could have done a little bit better in the effort they put into it. So we're going to put this one at the bottom of the B tier, again, making our B tier grow. Not too bad to have a lot of stuff in the middle, so it makes sense for that. Following that, our very last episode here, ranking on our tier list for Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 1. The episode of this one is the Hostage Crisis episode, where Anakin is in the Senator building and does not have his lightsaber, is having to fight off all the bounty hunters, Cad Bane, try to save Padme without his trusted weapon, essentially his life. The quote for this one is, "A secret shared is a trust formed." And it's a pretty good quote, I've got to say, obviously talking about the secret of Anakin and Padme's love and romance with each other, and more in terms of the episode, the fact that Padme has Anakin's lightsaber hidden with her and is having to try to make it so that the bounty hunters don't find the lightsaber and obviously don't find Anakin. So this is a pretty decent one. We're going to put it in the bottom of A tier because it's definitely a quote that I think made some impact on the episode and was pretty decent in terms of the impact on the characters and the story that the quote had. Alright everyone, and that concludes our Star Wars tier list of every single opening quote or moral from Season 1 of Star Wars The Clone Wars. I have to say I'm pretty happy with the results we've got. We've got a lot of B tier, can be expected, but I'm quite surprised with the amount of S tier quotes that we got. Only one F tier being "A single chance is a galaxy of hope." Absolute garbage. So glad that we got through that, guys. Let me know if you want to see more videos like this. Leave a like, leave a comment below, and we'll see you in the next one.